Well, the Mackinac Bridge has been called a miracle bridge for a lot of reasons. As Kathleen alluded to, the Straits of Mackinac are a pretty broad stretch of water, 4 miles across. But another reason that people were opposed to the idea of even trying to span those was a bridge in Tacoma Narrows, Washington. And some of you might remember seeing this video from your school days. This is Galloping Gertie.
Day, and the wind begins to speak with a roar that no man can fail to hear. In a 40-mile-an-hour gale, the feather span weaves like a ribbon in a swinging twist that you wouldn't believe possible unless you could see it as you do now. There's an automobile caught on the heaving roadway. The 11,000-ton feather span twists and strings the giant cables that support it. Cables of 6,300 wire strands, each 17 inches thick. Back out of the danger zone, all stricken spectators are driven to safety as the bridge gyrates like a nightmare high above the river, twisting, turning, curling. The lone motorist is forced to abandon the car. He has but a few minutes in which to save himself. Face to face with fate, his destiny hanging in the balance. Will he heed the last warning or perish with the doomed structure? But he saved himself by seconds. No structure of steel and concrete can stand such a strain. Steel girders buckle and giant cables snap like puny thread. There it goes! Engineers are divided as to the cause of the disaster. Some claim it was the use of solid girders. Others differ. But whatever the reason, Tacoma will rebuild. This time a bridge that will not provide a super thrill in the news.
Oh, sorry. All right, to do that. I'll just go to slide. All right, so Galloping Gertie opened in 1940, I believe, and within a year's time crashed, as we just saw. And the reason was the structure of the bridge was such that it set up resonance with the wind. Now, I'm not a physicist, I don't quite understand what that means, but we saw what it means. It began to vibrate with the wind and shook itself to pieces. So of course, people in Michigan didn't want to build a bridge that would do the same thing. The Straits of Mackinac are 4 miles wide at their closest point between, can you see my pointer if I do this?
Yes.
Okay, so here's Mackinac City and here's St. Ignace. That's the closest point between the two peninsulas, and it's still 4 miles wide. So of course people said it's impossible, we can't do it. Some of the other ideas they had, other than just a bridge, would be island hopping. You can see there are a lot of islands in the Straits, or maybe a floating bridge or a tunnel, but none of these ideas would float, actually. And there were other obstacles to building a bridge. The waves and the power of the Great Lakes is incredible, especially during a winter storm.
How deep was it there?
I'll get to that. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yep, that's what's coming next. And under that open water is there's a lot of water, and then there's a glacial gorge that runs through the center of the strait. So this is a little confusing because the blue is actually the land, and the red is the water showing the depths. The deepest part is here in the center, and that black line, I think if I click, yeah, is a glacial gorge that was left when the glaciers receded. It's 3,500 feet wide and 350 feet deep at its deepest point. So people figured it's impossible to anchor bridge piers in a chasm that deep. They just felt that would be an insurmountable obstacle. But thankfully, the challenges were overcome, and today Michigan is home to one of the most beautiful and longest, we're not the longest anymore, but we are a considerably long suspension bridge, and one of the most beautiful in the world, in my opinion. So that's just a little intro. I thought it might be fun to show you some pictures. I don't know how many of you have ever had the chance to see the Mackinac Bridge, but it's beautiful no matter what time of day, what season. It really is a thing of beauty. And now for the pop quiz. I warned you. You can just think to yourself the answer and see if you get it right. What year did the Mackinac Bridge open? I'll give you 3 seconds, and the answer is 1957. How long is the Mackinac Bridge? So I told you the straits were 4 miles long, but the bridge is actually, with the approaches on both sides, 5 miles long. Now you should know this because we've mentioned his name. Who designed the Mackinac Bridge? And Missy, I know you know this. It's David B. Steinman. We'll talk more about Dr. Steinman a little bit later. How tall are Mighty Mac's towers? They are 552 feet above the water at the very top. And who is known as the father of the Mackinac Bridge? That would be Prentice M. Brown, and we'll talk about him in a little bit as well. So for those of you who are not Michiganders, here's a quick geography lesson. We are blessed to be surrounded by these inland seas known as the Great Lakes. Michigan touches on 4 of the 5 Great Lakes. But that blessing also causes some challenges because we are a state divided, and it's not just U of M and MSU. We have 2 peninsulas that are separated here by the Mackinac Straits, or the Straits of Mackinac. So that was the challenge. How do we bring the 2 peninsulas together? Of course, the early people who lived here, the Potawatomi, the Ojibwe, the Menominee, and Odawa people, they didn't need a bridge. They got along just fine. But as more and more non-native people moved into Michigan, the need to connect the peninsulas grew. The Upper Peninsula is rich in natural resources. There's copper mines, there's timber, wildlife for hunters. It's an amazing, beautiful place. And people said, we need a way to connect these 2. And as early as 1887, after the opening of the Grand Hotel, this is the Grand Hotel on Mackinac Island, which is another beautiful place in Michigan to visit. Cornelius Vanderbilt was heard to say, now what we need is a bridge across the straits. So even back in 1887, people were thinking about a bridge. In 1881, the ferry service began. Now the ferries were transporting rail cars because, as I said, the UP was rich in natural resources. They needed to get things back and forth. So the train ferries operated from 1881 until 1984, over 100 years. But then, you know, Americans, we love our cars. So in 1923, a car ferry service was begun. The first boat put in service was the Ariel. She was a Detroit riverboat brought over to the Straits to ferry cars across that summer. She could carry 20 vehicles. I'm not sure why. She went back to Detroit after that first season and finished her life as a Detroit riverboat. But other car ferries followed after her. The St. Ignace and the Mackinac City were a couple of them. Now, the Michigan car ferry service was unique in that it was the first of its kind to be run by a state highway department. So this was run by the Michigan Department of Transportation. And of course, in Michigan, we needed specially built ferries to handle our winter weather. And there were a couple of these that were built and put into service and allowed the ferry service to run, maybe not all winter, but definitely into the winter months. As demand for the ferries grew, so did the ships. They kept getting bigger. In 1937, the Highway Department bought a converted rail car ferry and renamed her the City of Sheboygan. And this is a picture of that ferry. She could carry 85 vehicles and passengers. But the demand continued to grow. This is, I always think this is a fun picture to see these cars lined up. I would bet this is hunting season. I've been told during hunting season, people would wait in line almost all day. They'd sleep in their cars just to get on a ferry to get over to the UP so they could go hunting. The demand continued to grow despite the long lines and the challenges. Sometimes they had to carry their own luggage across the ice to get off the ferry and into town. The last car ferry that was built for the Straits was the Vacation Land, and she was built specifically for this service. She began service in 1952, and 5 years later, on November 1st, 1957, she was retired from the Straits of Mackinac because Mighty Mac had arrived. So they spent $4.75 million, and they got about 5 years of use out of her. She went on to do some other things, and I think if I remember correctly, maybe in the 1980s, they were towing her to China for scrap metal, and she sunk in the Pacific. So she is now on the bottom of the Pacific. Building a bridge is a huge undertaking. Thousands of people were involved. But in my opinion, it all started with this man, Prentice M. Brown. He was born in the UP in 1889. He was a lawyer, a US representative, and a US senator. Prentice Brown helped establish the bridge authority that finally got the bridge built. There had been other authorities over the years and attempts at bridging the straits, but fate always seemed to intervene. World War I got in the way, a depression, World War II. So they'd been trying all those decades, but as I said, fate seemed to always intervene and put the stop on building a bridge. But Prentice Brown believed that Michigan could bridge the straits, and he believed from personal experience that we needed this bridge. And this is his story. It was the winter of 1920. Prentice Brown was a young lawyer. He had an important case at the Supreme Court in Lansing. He had to get from St. Ignace, where he lived, down to Lansing. That meant he had to take a ferry across the straits, but the ferries were frozen in. He couldn't get on the ferry. So he rented a horse and cutter. Remember, this is 1920. But the ice was too jagged and rough, and the horse could not traverse the ice. So Prentice Brown and his colleague walked 4 miles across the frozen straits, only to arrive in Mackinac City too late to catch the train to Lansing. So that really made an impression on him. He was later quoted as saying, "That bitter hike across the straits made a lasting impression on me for the need of a bridge across the straits." He persevered and eventually put together the bridge authority that got the job done. And David Steinman was the engineer that the bridge authority hired. Steinman was born in 1886. He claims he was born in New York City. One of his descendants told me that may not be actually the truth. He might have been born in Europe, but I don't know either way. In the biography of him I read, it said New York City. He definitely grew up in New York City. He grew up in the shadow of the Brooklyn Bridge. And he was heard to say to his friends, "Someday I'm going to build a bridge every bit as magnificent as the Brooklyn Bridge." And he did. In fact, he built more than 400 bridges on 5 continents during his lifetime. I consider Steinman a true Renaissance man. He had 14 degrees in various academic fields. He was an engineer, a mathematician, a poet, an author, and of course, a bridge builder. He knew how to use science and engineering to overcome the challenges of the straits and build what he considered his crowning achievement, the Mackinac Bridge. When Galloping Gertie shook herself to death, David Steinman knew exactly what had happened. In fact, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. He knew why Galloping Gertie didn't work, and he knew how to fix that and use that knowledge when he built Mighty Mac for us. After the surveyors finished, of course, they were the first people on the job. When they finished, the next order of business was to get the piers put in. Mighty Mac has 33 piers. 30 of them began as cofferdams, and the cofferdam is this structure on the left. You can see how big it is when you realize that these are men climbing on it, putting it together. It was built on site at the straits, or the cofferdams, all 30 of them were, and then lowered into the straits. It was wrapped in steel and anchored to the bedrock using spud piles or steel spikes that they drove through it and into the bedrock. And 3 of the piers began as caissons. That's what this one is. Caissons were used in the deepest sections of the straits where that glacial gorge went through. 2 of them go down more than 200 feet to bedrock. To give you a little bit of perspective on how massive these piers are, the caisson below one of the towers is 116 feet in diameter. If you can picture a basketball court, that's 96 feet. So make that a little bit longer in your imagination and use that as the diameter, and that gives you an idea of how massive these piers are. When someone asked David Steinman what would happen if a freighter ran into the bridge, because the straits are very busy with freighter traffic going to and from through the Great Lakes and out into the Atlantic Ocean, Steinman said, well, the boat would sink with a serious loss of life. He firmly believed that Mighty Mac would withstand that collision. And he was right. He was proven right. Years later, when a Greek freighter did hit the North Tower in a fog, thankfully no lives were lost, but the freighter had to be towed back to Chicago, and it sustained $250,000 in damage. Mighty Mac was scuffed up a little bit and needed $45,000 in concrete repair. But it's the towers that catch our eye. Even from miles away, people approaching the bridge see the towers, and they are beautiful. In fact, beautiful bridges with soaring towers was David Steinman's signature. He felt bridges could be and should be beautiful. We already talked about the towers rising 552 feet above the water. I came across this poster in a restaurant near Acadia National Park in Maine. I was very surprised to see Steinman's 75th anniversary commemorative. And there's Mighty Mac right in the middle. The reason they had this poster in their restaurant is one of Steinman's bridges, the Deer Isle Bridge, was just a few miles away. Now that the Deer Isle Bridge was finished in just shortly after the Tacoma Narrows Bridge collapsed. And Steinman helped build the Deer Isle Bridge. So when Gertie collapsed, he realized that some of those structural flaws were also present in the Deer Isle Bridge. So he returned to the site and worked with engineers and construction workers to correct the problems. Steinman used what he learned at Deer Isle to make Mighty Mac one of the most stable bridges in the world, even though it has one of the longest spans. Oh, my notes here. So that was a fun find. And then I tracked it down on Etsy. When John Roebling invented wire rope in 1841, it revolutionized bridge building. The cables that support Mighty Mac's roadway are a collection of wires that are bundled together, and then those bundles are all clamped together, and that's what these gentlemen are doing. They're clamping it and measuring it. So these are bundles of wires. There's enough wire in Mighty Mac to wrap around the earth 2 times. So that's a lot of wire. Laying those wires or those cables was called spinning because there was a wheel that went between the towers carrying the wire. They had to attach cowbells to those wheels to warn the men when it was coming so nobody would get hit in the head and knocked overboard. And these are the men working again on tightening up those cables. These will be the cables that we'll see that hold up the roadway, and that's coming in, I think, this next picture actually. So those cables are these right here. And then other wire suspenders hang down. To the wind, Mighty Mac is invisible. Steinman designed our Miracle Bridge to withstand winds up to and over 600 miles per hour. He did this by including metal grating in the center of the roadway. That allows the wind to flow through the bridge and not push against it. He also built deep stiffening trusses, which is a lesson oops, my bad. I just did something I didn't like. There we go. He built these deep stiffening trusses, which is a lesson he learned from Deer Isle. And if you remember on Galloping Gertie, I should have pointed it out, I forgot to, but the trusses on Galloping Gertie were very thin and very solid. And that was another reason she set up resonance. So Steinman took that knowledge and used it to make these changes when he designed Mighty Mac. A lot of machines were used in building the bridge, you can just imagine. I just want to highlight a couple of them. One is Gizmo. Gizmo was the brainchild of two of Merritt Chapman's engineers. Two young men came up with this concoction and they didn't know what to call it, so they just called it Gizmo. Gizmo supported those spud piles, those steel spikes that hold the cofferdams, or the cofferdams into the bedrock. But Gizmo could hold them at just the correct angle, and then a 10-ton steam hammer at the top of it would pound that pile into the bedrock. Gizmo could drive a 125-foot pile through 100 feet of hardpan. Hardpan is that layer of mud and silt that's on top of the bedrock. So it could drive it through 100 feet of hardpan into the bedrock in 30 minutes. Now that job used to take 4 hours. So when these engineers came up with Gizmo, they saved an enormous amount of time and money, going from a 4-hour operation to 30 minutes. And Gizmo could be tilted at just the right angle because each of those spuds had to go in at a certain angle. Now you can imagine that was a lot of force, and the force of Gizmo hitting those piles was so strong it would stun or even kill fish in the area. So the fish soon learned to stay away when Gizmo was working. The other machine I wanted to talk about was the creeper. There were 2 creepers used on building Mighty Mac, one at each tower. The creeper was a huge block and tackle assembly. So the towers were built section by section, and each section was lifted into place by the creeper. The creeper could lift 100 tons of steel 80 feet above itself. So you can get the idea looking at creeper, how it would just lift each section up, set it on the existing section of tower, and then the men, of course, the workers had to come up and attach it with bolts or welding, however they did their job. But the creeper put it in place for them. Whenever the winds kicked up, and they do quite often in the straits of Mackinac, the creepers had to be shut down or they would become 100-ton wrecking machines. And of course, the bridge never would have been built if it hadn't been for the men, the workers. There were over 3,500 men who worked at the site right there in the Straits of Mackinac, but more than 11,000 people contributed to the building of Mighty Mac. They were on site, they were at the quarries, they were in the steel mills, in offices, on the ships. And I didn't include slides of the ships. I do talk about them in my book. There were several specialized ships that were involved in, towing the caissons into place or the cofferdams and pouring the concrete, and pretty amazing. That's a whole another interesting aspect too. Of course, the workers in high steel are the ones most people think of when you think of bridge builders. They're kind of the iconic bridge builder. It takes a special kind of person, in my opinion, to be able to walk among the clouds to do your job. You might notice, and Kim Nowak, who was the engineer and is now the executive secretary for the Mackinac Bridge Authority, Kim is quick to point out that these men are not wearing safety harnesses. This was 1955, 1956. They had the option to wear them, but it wasn't required. And most of the workers chose not to. They felt they needed freedom of movement to do their job. So I'm just amazed at what these men could do. And if you notice the ship down below, it gives you, oops, is that covering the ship for you probably? There, oh, go away. Anyway, you kind of get an idea of how high up they are. There's the ship, pretty high up. In July of 2007, Mighty Mac celebrated its 50th year serving Michigan, and there was a special celebration. I don't know if you noticed my t-shirt came from that celebration. And at that same time, this statue was dedicated in Bridgeview Park in St. Ignace. The statue was created by Janice Trimp. I think she's a Michigander, and it's actually quite lovely, quite a nice piece of art. And I don't have it in this picture, but you can see Mighty Mac when you're standing in the park just off behind him.
Was that statue of David Steinman?
Nope, that was an iron worker.
Oh, okay.
Yep, he was one of the iron workers. Not all of the workers were in the clouds, though. There was a small crew of divers. Steinman's design minimized underwater work to prevent deaths from caisson's disease, which is also called the bends. This condition is caused, I don't quite understand all the chemistry, but it's something when they come up too quickly, the gas levels in their bloodstream, something happens and the gas can cause serious illness or death. In fact, 5 of the workers on the Brooklyn Bridge died from the bends. And Washington Roebling, John's son, who was the engineer in charge of the Brooklyn Bridge, he was left an invalid for life because of the bends. He evidently went down with the divers and made too rapid of an ascent and was invalided. Divers were the eyes of the engineers. They would inspect the foundations and the fittings. They tightened bolts. They collected dropped tools. They attached sheet metal and burned off excess structural steel. Whatever needed to be done underwater, the divers did. Steinman said, "One simply cannot imagine the Mackinac Bridge being built without the contribution of the divers." Now remember, this is the mid-1950s. I'm not sure if scuba diving had even really come along then. So you can see he's got this very antiquated looking diving suit. And his helmet was probably one of those big steel ball helmet things. But they got the job done, and it couldn't have been done without them. There's a grim tradition that says bridge building demands a life. And contractors estimate that there will be 1 life lost for every $1 million spent on construction of a bridge. Mighty Mac cost $100 million. So we might have expected 100 people would have died. But thankfully, that number was significantly smaller. 5 men died during the construction of Mighty Mac. There's a plaque like this at each of the approaches to the bridge in memory of those men. And it tells their names and what their position was and what union they worked with. I can't prove it, but I wonder if the prayers of Lewis Adams and others contributed to that low mortality rate on Mighty Mac. This is a picture of Lewis in 1955. He climbed to the top of one of the towers as it was being built. Lewis was a member of the Little Traverse Bay bands of Odawa Indians, and he climbed up to perform a pipe ceremony and pray for the blessings of Gitche Manitou for the safe completion of the bridge. I only just recently discovered this picture. I didn't know about this when I wrote my book, and I wished I had. I would have loved to included it. Because of course, this is the homeland of the Odawa people. And to me, it means a lot that they kind of gave their approval and asked blessing on the bridge. In fact, the Odawa people have named Labor Day is now the Lewis Adams holiday. And they remember him and his wife on Labor Day every year. The bridge opened on November 1st, 1957, 3.5 years after construction began. This picture shows some of the key figures involved, and we have, I'm trying to find, there's David Steinman, and this is Soapy Williams, our governor at the time. Oh, I have the names all down here, so I guess I'll let you figure it out. Prentice Brown, is that Prentice? I think, yeah. I was fortunate enough to be able to meet 2 of these men before they passed away. Lawrence Rubin here on the end was the executive secretary of the Mackinac Bridge Authority when it was being built and for many years, maybe decades afterwards. He was an amazing man, and he wrote a book. Maybe I can hold it up and you can see it, which I used in my research and was very helpful. And he was so gracious. I met with him and he read my manuscript and gave me some ideas, and it was very helpful. And next to him is Bill Cochran, who lived in East Lansing. So I was able to meet Bill and also share my manuscript with him before he passed away. So I felt I was very lucky to be able to do that. So on November 1st, 1957, the bridge opened to traffic. Now, the authorities, the officials were concerned about Michigan weather. You know, those fearsome gales of November, they can be pretty treacherous. So they decided to postpone the official dedication to the next summer. Of course, November 1st of 1957 was a lovely day in Michigan, but they didn't know. After the officials drove across, the first civilian to drive across was a man named Al Carter from Chicago. And this is the car that he drove. It is now at the Grand Rapids Museum. Al Carter had made it his goal in life to be the first to do everything as much as he could, be the first in line at the St. Louis World's Fair, things like that. So he waited hours and hours and hours in line to be the first person to cross the Mackinac Bridge when it opened. As I said, the official dedication took place in June of 1958, and there we see David Steinman and his wife. They came back for it. And in typical Michigan fashion, a storm blew through the straits during the days of the celebration. High winds damaged some of the floats, but once the storm passed, the dedication was deemed a success. And it was a huge multi-day celebration with parades and all kinds of floats, and it was quite a big to-do. I came across these as I was preparing my talk for this, and I thought people might be interested to see 2 postage stamps have been issued in honor of the bridge, one at its dedication and the second one in 2010. So our bridge has got its own stamps. Pedestrians are allowed to walk on the bridge only one day a year, and that's on Labor Day for the annual Labor Day Bridge Walk. In recent years, they've changed how that's operated, and I don't think last year they did it, of course, but hopefully this year we'll be back to doing it. So in conclusion, I thought I'd share a few statistics. Numbers can't tell the whole story of what the Mackinac Bridge means to the people of Michigan and our economy, but they can give us a little hint. During the last year that the car ferries ran, and that's the red column, they carried 900,000 vehicles through that whole year. 1 month in July of 2018, Mighty Mac carried 610,000 vehicles across the straits. So that's an interesting comparison. Of course, more and more people are traveling, but you can see that Mighty Mac definitely has a much greater capacity. In fact, every year, 4 million vehicles cross the straits of Mackinac on the Mackinac Bridge. So that's huge. And it's interesting, I think I've got this correct. Mighty Mac is totally self-funded. The toll, which is really reasonable, it's like $4 a car. The money from the tolls is used to maintain the bridge, and maintenance is going on constantly. They have a rotation, and there's always something being done to maintain the bridge. I didn't even talk at all about the financial bond issues, and Lawrence Rubin would have talked about that. He loved that aspect of it, how it was an 11th hour getting the funding. But all of that was paid off. So the bridge was paid off a while ago, many years ago, and now it maintains itself through the tolls. There's no state money allocated to maintaining or operating the bridge. So I thought that was pretty interesting. If you'd like to learn more about Mighty Mac, I have a list of references on my website, and my website is right down there, and I just covered it for you again, sorry. That'll go away in a second. I talk about, I have a little bit more detail in my book, and I want to point out that the pictures, a lot of the pictures you saw tonight and the pictures I used in my book came from the Department of Transportation. They were taken by a professional photographer named Herman Ellis. Mr. Ellis was hired by the state to document the construction of the Mackinac Bridge, and he did a fabulous job. His photos are wonderful. Those are all available through the Department of Transportation, and there's also a couple other archive sites that have them online. So really wonderful resource.
Jackie, I think you told me the picture surrounded by yellow was the those clouds. That's actually the Milky Way.
Yes, this is the young lady, Mary Beth Kaczynski. I may be mispronouncing her last name. I saw this on a Facebook page, and I contacted her and asked her permission to use it. She is an amazing photographer who specializes in Michigan, but I think she's done other places. Catches amazing images, and that's one of them. So there are more photographs on my site, maybe some of hers and other people. There's a couple other videos using early construction photos that a gentleman had done as he was in the area, and his granddaughter found them in the attic and she digitized them. So there's some fun stuff if you're interested in the bridge on my website. And then there's some kids activities if you have children in your life that you could look at too. And again, I mentioned the books, so I don't know if you can see how well you can see them here, but there's a biography of Steinman that I used, and then the book that Steinman himself wrote about the bridge. And you can get the details on my website if you want to check those out from your library. So I think, Kathleen, we're ready for questions.
Well, there are quite a few questions.
Oh, okay.
So I'll start at the top. So Stan and Sandra in Montreal wanted to know how they made the movie of the Tacoma Bridge back in the 40s.
I don't know for sure. I think they had enough warning that, because even when they were, I read that even when they were still building it, when it was under construction, they noticed this wavering, and they had an inkling that maybe something wasn't quite right. So I think when the day it actually shook itself to death, it was slow enough that they could get some photographers, some video people there to capture it. And you can tell it was old footage. It was done, in the 40s. Yeah, it was pretty interesting.
So it actually set up and was wobbling and swaying for several days.
I don't know if it was days but it was many hours, I'm sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That was fun to include that little video news clip. Thank you.
Well, I remember seeing it when I was in grade school. So it really rang some memory bells for me. I wondered if any other people ever had seen it before.
Yeah, I saw it, Louis, just before I drove over the bridge as a 3-year-old boy.
Oh, no.
And we turned around.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, that's an interesting point. There are people who are afraid to drive over the Mackinac Bridge. So the Bridge Authority has a service where they will put they have drivers that will drive your car for you across the bridge. Because some people are just terrified. To me, it's lovely. You've got a great view up there, but for some people, it's just too frightening.
Okay, we also had, let's see, I'm just going in order. Hugh said, what was the name of the movie starring Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour that was filmed at the Grand Hotel?
Somewhere in Time. And I highly recommend it.
Great movie.
Yes, it is. Of course, they won't show the bridge in that one, I don't think, but Mackinac Island is a magical place in itself.
Well, you see the hotel.
Yes.
Let's see, from Stan and Sandra. Obviously, no one in London looked at the galloping Gertie's problem. The London Millennium Bridge also swayed when it opened in 2000.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that.
Did you have anything else on that, Stan? Okay, I'll move on. Melissa, the great-granddaughter, said she has the poster of your 75th anniversary commemorative
Didn't work because this was in the way.
poster.
Yes, actually I do. I framed it and it's in our hallway. And my
It's
daughter
in
was
my
in the
study.
room watching this and she's like, oh my goodness, there's the poster. I did get it from
Nice.
David Stein, my grandmother, Alberta, David Steinman's daughter.
Oh,
Is where I got it from a long time ago, I guess.
okay, nice.
Yeah.
I had never seen it until 2 years ago.
Oh yeah, it's been in our, but anyway, I enjoy looking at it. It's a good
I do
poster.
too, yeah.
That's
Okay.
wonderful.
So we went to walk the Millennium Bridge at the Millennium in London, and they couldn't let anyone on it after they built it because it swayed.
Oh my,
So I don't know what they did. It wasn't a car bridge, it was a person bridge. And you couldn't walk on it. So I don't know what they done to correct it, because I
And
think
Yeah, it goes down the center towards the Globe Theater. You know, right.
Well, they needed David Steinman to fix
Yeah.
that.
he would have
Yeah.
known exactly what to do.
Let's see. Okay, this one was, were there any deaths during construction? And you did answer that. Hugh said divers get nitrogen in their blood. It results in the bends.
Right, yeah.
Stan says First Nations people are known for their skills in high tower work.
I've heard that, especially the Mohawk, I've heard, are very adept at it. Yeah.
They've built skyscrapers and bridges in New York City and elsewhere. Jack said the scuba went into use in 1942 and uses wetsuits. The diver in the photograph is using a dry suit because of the cold, deep water.
Okay, okay.
And then, so Greg, your husband, was asking Melissa if she knows where her great-grandfather was born. Was it New York or Europe? New York City or Europe?
I'm pretty sure it was New York City is what I've grown up hearing, but
Okay.
maybe you heard Jackie from my Uncle Peter, who's sort of the family
Right.
lineage person, family tree person. So I would sort of bow to his judgment, but I always understood that he was born here, or if he wasn't, he came over as a
Very
infant
young.
baby or something.
Yeah.
But I just, sorry, without more information, don't know for sure.
But I think we can say with confidence his parents were European.
Absolutely, yeah,
And emigrated over, and then he grew up first generation American. Yeah.
definitely. I agree with that for sure. Do you know that there's a documentary on the History Channel? I put that in the chat.
Oh,
Have
on
you
what?
seen that?
About the bridge or?
Yeah, about Steinman and the bridge.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure if I've seen that one or not. I'll have to take a look. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I'll look for it too. It might just be about Steinman, but the bridge is mentioned in it, and they have real footage of it, like movie reel footage.
Yeah, cool.
Anyway,
Melissa, Melissa, since you're unmuted, so have any of the children or relatives, offspring of David's become engineers and followed in his footsteps?
not necessarily that I can think of offhand. So not civil engineers for sure, but I think, yeah, I don't know. My kids are interested in engineering.
Let's see. So this is from Stan and Sandra. Canadian engineers wear a metal ring in reminder of a bridge that fell. He wonders which one. The Johnsons in Indian River, Michigan. Thank you for sharing. We live 25 miles south from the bridge and have driven it, biked it, run it, and walked it many times.
Wonderful.
We enjoyed learning many new facts about it. I made my grandson and granddaughter drive across it for their first time this summer. One a new driver's license and the other with his learner's permit.
Oh boy.
Big deal, fun time.
Yeah.
Thanks to your great grandpa. That was very nice. That was from the Johnsons in Indian River. Bernice Palmatier, is the bridge closed for periods during the winter? I was told by a pharmacist that he worked for the Public Health Department of Michigan and would go to the Upper Peninsula. At a certain point in the winter, the health workers left for the rest of the winter. The uppers who stayed were thought to be a bit different.
Well, the bridge is open year round. They close it sometimes if there's fog, but not often for that. What I heard last year, the year before, they closed it a couple times because ice was falling from the cables, and that was dangerous. But for the most part, it withstands the winds, and it's open year round, except in special circumstances. And sometimes if there's high winds, they'll put out high wind warnings, and they may, I'm trying to think, maybe taller trucks or something, they may caravan them across in a special way. But for the most part, it stays open. Now, the reason people would leave the UP, I was surprised. Greg and I were up there in the winter once, I think. Mackinac City becomes almost like a ghost town. So a lot of people, and Mackinac Island, there's very few people stay on the island. It's a special breed, like they say, that live up there year round. So that's more of maybe what that person was alluding to, that the people who stay they're a hardy bunch, that's for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Don Meter, to everyone, have you heard of any cars being blown off the bridge?
Not blown off. There have been one or two that went off. One I heard was probably a suicide. One was someone driving too fast. It was a little Yugo. That's the one that made a lot of headlines a few years back, a couple decades back. Those are the only two that I'm aware of personally, but I'm not an expert on that, so I don't know.
Okay. Somebody wants to know where you live, which is in Holland, Michigan. So if you went on our website, if you wanted, this was from Barbara Mahoney, if you wanted to get in touch with Jackie, you could look her up on our website and or her website.
My website,
you can see her website right there, and it probably has contact information.
Yes.
Okay. Stan, it looks like the Canadian bridge that fell, or the reason the Canadian engineers wear the ring, metal ring, was in Quebec City in 1907. So, okay. Well, you want to kind of, let's get back to where we can see everyone. So I guess stop sharing your
Okay.
screen.
There we go.
Okay. Does anybody have any other questions? Since we're all like, I mean, anybody, Melissa, thank you for joining us. It was
Yeah.
really very special to have you in our little group
Oh,
today.
it looks
Yeah.
like Peter joined us.
Yeah,
Hang on
here's
a minute.
Peter. Well, that's
Kathleen.
Peter Peter, thank you, Peter, for letting me know.
Oh, okay. Yeah, nice to have you with us and enjoying the great things your relative did.
So
He must
Peter
have been
is
quite a man.
Peter is Steinman's grandson and actually lived with David and his wife for a time when he was a young boy. So he's
Okay.
quite knowledgeable about David Steinman. And this is introduce Peter. Can you unmute and introduce is this your daughter?
Peter, you push down the space bar to speak.
Oh, now we lost him.
So maybe on second page.
Well, thank you.
Oh,
This
there
was a
they
great
are.
presentation.
We had a comment to make.
Mhm.
Okay.
We met a diver who worked on the bridge, who lived on the lake across from us in Harbor Springs. And he was explaining that there were divers that came from California that dove for abalone shells and wanted to dive and work on the bridge, but that they found that they couldn't hire them because they could dive well, but they didn't know what to do with tools at all. And so that they couldn't use them, and they
Right.
sent them back to California. But he talked about diving, and it was fascinating to listen to him talk about doing that. And also, he learned to fly a small airplane and would fly every day to Mackinac Island, delivering supplies to the islanders there too. Fascinating individual.
Yeah. Wow.
This was just a couple years ago. So we have a cottage on Round Lake and we kayaked across and he was sitting out in his yard. He's quite an elderly man, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And we didn't see him last summer, but hopefully he's still around, but he lives there. And he used to land a float plane right on the lake there that he kept by his house.
And who is this you're talking about?
This is the man who was a diver in
Was the
Bill-
diver? Okay.
And he grew up in Sheboygan, Michigan, which is up not too far from the bridge.
Mhm.
Yes. Okay, well, everyone, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Jackie, thank you for writing your book, what's called Mighty Mac, the bridge Michigan built. And we just appreciate everybody's involvement. And we hope to see you next Sunday.